ladies and gentlemen, as always, thank you for taking the time to listen. In this episode, I sat down with Tim Garcia. Tim served 28 years in law enforcement, retiring as an assistant chief. In his career, he served in multiple functions, including investigations, tactical teams, and supervision. As a police officer, Tim received the Medal of Valor and the Purple Heart for being shot in the line of duty. Additionally, Tim served a stint in the U.S. Coast Guard as a port security specialist. When Tim retired from law enforcement, his first venture into corporate security was as the regional safety and security manager of a large financial payment company, where he was responsible for physical security at multiple locations throughout the United States. He has since left this position and is now the security manager at a large petroleum company, overseeing the security practices and personnel at multiple petroleum plants in Southern California. In our conversation, we talk about how he came into law enforcement, considering that his father was a member of an outlaw motorcycle gang, and his subsequent transition from law enforcement to corporate security. We talked about topics such as his experience with the corporate hiring process, the culture of corporate security, his move to the petroleum industry, and how his time with the Coast Guard benefited this transition. Overall, Tim provides some good general advice on how to operate in the corporate world when transitioning from a law enforcement career. Episode 5 with Tim Garcia. This is the Transition Drill Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Pantani, and I've been a police officer for 30 years. I'll be having interesting conversations with guests who are former first responders, military, or both, and who will explain their experiences with their transition. I cannot say this enough. Prepare today for your transition tomorrow. Regardless of the why, you're closing in on your retirement, you just want to do something different, or other circumstances have or are forcing your transition, I believe this podcast will be beneficial to you. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Let's get into this. I'm at the start of this, call it a career, the podcast. You are at the beginning of this, and you were technically at the beginning of my law enforcement career, considering that we were one academy, because you were 279, right?
279, right.
So you were the senior class, keeping us at the end of the row, not letting us get into to our lockers or get into the shower. And now you're here at the beginning of this. So I get
full circle.
I hope it's a good omen.
I think so, yeah, definitely.
So I appreciate you being here. Make it simple. Coast Guard.
Yes.
You were in the Coast Guard.
Yes. So interesting. I always kind of had a desire for service, right? You know, kind of hence law enforcement. And going through college, I was kind of looking at the different programs, ROTC programs, and there was one, it was a naval program, and it just didn't quite work out. It wasn't a good fit. I actually went and, sat in a couple of sessions, and I'm like, it's not going to work for me. Fast forward, to the around, I don't know, I guess it was early 1990s, right? And so I knew a couple of guys that were in the Army Reserve, and they kept telling me, hey, you should do it. And I'm like, I'm not so sure. And then I saw some advertisement for the Coast Guard, and it was called a direct petty officer program. And they started you off, I think it was like I want to say E4. They would start you off as an E4, and looked into it, and they had it was called a port security billet, and I was like interested in it, and my law enforcement background really fit what they were doing, and so they talked to the recruiter, and he says, hey, we have a port security unit out of the Port of LA Long Beach. They're at Terminal Island. And he goes, I think you'd be a great fit. And so got to talking about it a little bit more, and I'm like, okay, sounds cool. Yeah. I think I'm going to do this. And so I told my wife, hey, this would be it's a reserve gig. I don't think anything, bad will come of it. And she was like, if this was, what you really want to do, then, okay, I'm supportive of it. And so, got sworn in. I negotiated an E5 spot. Went in to Cape May, New Jersey, for it's not really a boot camp, because you're not going in, as an unrated or a boot, so to speak. So it's a the program is designed more just to kind of acclimate you to the Coast Guard, and customs of the Coast Guard, saluting, and so that you could fit in, and know your way around once you are done with it. And so,
but ultimately, it is a reserve unit.
It was ultimately a reserve unit, and then I got sworn in, and unfortunately, 9/11 occurred.
Oh,
and so that kind of changed a lot. So what ended up happening is right after 9/11, that day, probably like yourself, I was working at Anaheim PD as a Berg detective. I show up to work. I'm hearing stuff going on the radio, on the regular radio and the news radio, and show up to work, and now I'm looking at the monitors, in our office, and it's showing the highlights of what's going on, right? The planes hitting the Twin Towers, and we're all sitting there going, this is something more.
Right.
And then within a matter of probably a few days, I get orders from the Coast Guard saying, hey, your reserve unit has now been activated to full time, and we'll see you in a couple days. And so I was activated for a total of 2 years full time. And that was right out of the port of LA Long Beach. It was nice that I didn't have to really go anywhere.
Right.
But I was obviously obligated to service for that 2-year stint. And really what it was, at that particular time, because of the terrorist activity, 40% of all commerce, right? So coming into the United States is actually coming into the port of LA Long Beach. So you can see the container ships, they're coming in. And so the fear would be that, some type of terrorist attack would occur in that area and then would cripple the U.S. economy. And so our job as port security officers were to actually board high profile vessels, whether it was about 13 miles out or, a little bit closer, or escorting vessels out of the port, whether it was LA alone. So,
did they actually have a concern that vessels leaving the port could be attacked?
It was based on a metric system they had, and the obviously the higher threats were the vessels coming in.
Gotcha.
I think really kind of escorting them out was just more of a show of force, and maybe goodwill even, because we did that with at that time. The cruise ship industry was still moving and it really hadn't slowed down because of those events. So what we were doing is we would actually board the cruise ships as they were, and escort them out. And so as they were escorting out, what happens kind of learned a little bit, but what happens when vessels come in and out of the port of LA, there's what they call a pilot, a ship pilot. And that person has, knowledge of the port. And so what they do is they actually many times they all board the ship, right? So incoming ship, whether it's LA Long Beach, they'll board the vessel, and then either many times the ship captain will basically allow the pilot to navigate into the harbor, so it's safe, no issues, it's all good. On occasion, they may not, and if they don't, then if something bad happens, it's on them. If something bad happens, then it's... But
the pilot's still going to be he's in
there just in case something goes sideways. He's there. So we would board many times with the pilot. And they usually boarded only maybe a few miles out, and as the ship was coming in, before there was really no on their end, there was no sense of security. It was merely just navigating the boat. That was normal business.
So a pilot is a civilian
job,
working for that particular harbor or that
Correct.
Particular port.
Yeah. So for LA, they actually have city employees who are pilots that will do that, and then on the Long Beach side, they're contract guys that do it. So yeah, it was kind of fascinating to watch, how that all went down. When we boarded 13 miles out, it was just us. It was us on one of the Coast Guard patrol boats. They would get us up there. We'd go up the Jacob's ladder. We'd take security control of the vessel, and then we'd come in. And then if we were that far out, we would see the LA pilot or the Long Beach pilot, then they would board after us because we were so far out. But that was because there was an issue of security, and we would do a quick check, the ship. We're checking, the engine room. We're checking up on the bridge of the ship. We're actually, going through the different quarters, where there was, the galley or storage areas, and doing real quick checks to make sure, everything was code 4, so to speak. Yeah.
Right. So I didn't realize that you were actually doing that while you were already a law enforcement officer. So I'm sure that was a benefit then to your team having law enforcement experience.
Yeah. So that initial calling, there was about 65 reservists that were called. And out of that 65, I would probably say just slightly less than half were had law enforcement experience. Okay. So there was guys from LAPD. Interesting enough, I had to still this day. We matter of fact, we text each other just about every day. There's the handful of guys that we've remained friends through that entire time, and one of them, who now is with Department of Homeland Security, at the time I believe it was INS. I think it was, and so interesting story, and I'll tell you about it because it's kind of funny. Well, I think it's funny, but so
that's all it's important. Is it's funny to you?
Funny to me. I find kind of weird things kind of funny. But anyways, so there's 65 of us get called up, and we're all kind of, some of the guys I kind of knew from prior to 9/11 happening, because I was already my job as a port security guy. Our initial job prior to 9/11, I was checking containers. Okay. So when containers, would get come into the U.S., we would go and check for hazmat and if they had any illegals hiding them in, drugs, all that stuff. So we would do that. That was my reserve duty normally prior to 9/11. 9/11 happened. 65 guys get called up, along with a bunch of other guys, but that was just for our port security section. And one of the guys, like I said, was this guy named Darren, and I, we're talking. And he tells me, he's with INS, and oh, cool. And I said, and I tell him, and I asked, well, what do you do in INS? He goes, oh, well, I got assigned to working over in Anaheim jail and a few other jails in Orange County because of this one guy who got shot in Anaheim. He got shot by an illegal, and they mandated in these jails to have INS officers checking people's statuses, because what happened is this one cop from Anaheim who got shot, it turned out that this guy had been released, and he shouldn't have because he was illegal. And I'm looking at him, and I go, well, do you recall what that cop's name was? And he looks at me and goes, I think his name was Tim. And I go, was his last name Tim Garcia? And he says, yeah. And I said, well, that's me. So so we both had a little chuckle out of that. And Darren and I become longtime friends.
Cool.
Yeah. So he's part of a little group. Probably out of that 65, 5 of us remained really, really close friends. Darren, a guy who works with LA Sheriff Department. I call him Dee. But his real name's Robert. And then another guy named John, who was a plumber, who actually turned out to be a really, really, really good friend of mine, because every time I had a plumbing issue, he would always come over. Unfortunately, he about 2 years ago, he moved to Texas. Oh, but that group of us, we all seem to text each other every day, if not every other day. So it's a really good friendship.
Now, you were saying that program originally was supposed to take you through into an officer program.
For me, you could become a warrant officer, and for me, there was no more interest in it. I think what happened is I got burned out too fast, because I expected a reserve program, traditional, where you do 1 weekend of a month, and then you have your 2 weeks of a year, and being catapulted into that 2-year duty it really took away from what I wanted to do, at work and stuff I wanted to do with family. And so, as soon as I was done, I was done. A lot of guys would go the 20 years, right, to get that retirement out of it. And for me, it just wasn't an option anymore. I was like, I'm done with this. It was fun while it lasted. I got some really good benefits out of it, some really good experience out of it, and made some really good friends out of it. But it's time to move on.
How long had you been a cop at that point then?
Let's see. About 6-7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So taking it a little further back, did you grow up in Southern California?
I did. I grew up in Walnut. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am.
Yeah.
I grew up in Baldwin Park.
So okay, close by. Yeah.
Was law enforcement something, or the military something you knew from early age, or?
No, it's funny because I've had a really successful law enforcement career, and a lot of knowledge and expertise on a lot of different areas. And when I'm talk to people, at my current job, which is with Marathon Petroleum, I oversee security operations there at the refinery, and start talking to these guys, they'll, that question may come up, because, wow, you got, a bunch of knowledge, and, some of the security guards there that want to move into law enforcement, and I'm always trying to help them, and they say, this is what I always wanted to do since I was a little kid, was be a police officer. And they asked me, you? And I said, no. Almost kind of fell into it. Really, it was kind of unusual. So I went to school at Cal State Fullerton. My parents thought it would be a great idea for me to major in business. I was the first one to go to college in my family. My parents didn't really have a whole lot of knowledge about what college really was, other than the fact that you should further your education and it'll be a really big asset for you in life.
So no other law enforcement in your family? No.
Matter of fact, almost the complete opposite. I don't even think you may even know this, but my dad was in a motorcycle gang.
Oh,
he was a Vago.
But there's the connection.
Yeah, to some degree, right? But yeah, so it's kind of funny. So but not a lot of people knew about that. But it was funny. I had a conversation with Matt Remmers about that one day, and I was like kind of shocked. But anyways, no, so growing up, it wasn't like we were in my family. We're like anti-law enforcement. My dad was always one of those to respect authority, always, and so we had a few neighbors of ours that were in law enforcement, but even then, I don't think my dad didn't really associate with them a lot. They were just neighbors. We waved to them as we drove by, and we said hi. And if they were at a block party, we'd say hi, but that's about it. And so I really, I didn't really gravitate towards them. And hey, let me ask you about your job. And hey, did you shoot anybody today? It wasn't that type of thing. So go to Cal State Fullerton, go to get a degree in business with an emphasis in finance, graduate and start working in a bank. And within days, I'm getting into the feeling.
Absolutely hate it.
I hated it. And it's so where I was posted in that bank, there was a clock directly across the way, and I would look at the clock every day and think to myself, I can't believe it's only got 2 hours have gone by. I feel like I've been here for
10 years.
Yeah, and it's like this is not going to work, and so this is not going to work. I'm just not happy. I don't feel fulfilled. There's got to be something. I can't see myself doing this for the rest of my life, right? Because that's in your mind. You have to work till you're older,
right?
And I was young, and I was in my early 20s. So, interesting enough, my sister, who was about a few years younger than me, she was dating a guy who just graduated from the academy, Ellie Sheriff, and he was a really nice guy. Come over and I chat with him and just all around a nice guy. And so one day I thought, ask him about work. So I said, hey, tell me about your job, man. What is it you do? And he's like, oh, I graduated from the academy, LA Sheriff, and, your first job assignment is, working in the jail. He goes, I'm over at Men's Central Jail right now, and explaining, we do this and that, and I'm like, wow, that sounds pretty cool. And so I got to kind of thinking about it. I'm like, what he does sounds like 100 times better than what I'm doing. And then kind of go back to that where I was talking about a couple of our neighbors were police officers or deputy sheriffs. So one happened to be a captain, and his name is Larry Waldy, who actually turned out to be an undersheriff of LA County. And so his wife's name's Charlotte. Great people. I knocked on their door one day and I said, "Hey, Charlotte." She answered, and I said, I'd love to talk to Larry about what he does for work, and would that be possible?" And she's like, "Hey, hold on, Tim." So she calls her husband, and she's like, "Larry said for you to go to Whittier Star Center. Go to Star Center tomorrow, and if you have time." And I said, "Yeah, I do. What time?" And she's, "Oh, he said 10 o'clock." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." So go ask for him. He'll be expecting you. I said, "Okay, great." So and rolled in there, and spoke with him about what he did, and he was like, "Yeah, well, this is what I do," and and kind of laid everything out, like from you start the academy, you work in the jail, you go to patrol, all the different assignments that the sheriff department has, and how large the sheriff department is, thousands of deputy sheriffs, and hundreds of opportunities, and I'm like, "Okay, I'm doing this."
Sold.
What do I do? Because I didn't know, what do I do? Do I sign something, or, what do I do?
Take my blood.
Take my blood, and so he's like, "Well, you need to go test." And they do that every Saturday morning at Star Center here. So he goes, "I think it's 8 o'clock or so, but you can, if you walk out and you go to recruitment, they'll give you a flyer, and it'll have all the information that you need to do." I said, "Okay, great." So took the flyer, sure enough, 8 o'clock, and tells show up in business attire and take the test. And okay, so get up Saturday morning, put everything on, and sure enough, there's like lines of hundreds of people there. I mean, literally, back then, 100 probably. I want to say probably, because I remember there was two, I want to say maybe 2 groups, 3 groups in different classrooms, and I think each of those groups are probably close to 65 people in a class. And so anyways, I marched in line with the rest of them, and they just kind of file you into different seats and give you the test, and tell you to fill it out. And so I filled it out, and then you wait around till they grade it. So if they call your name, they'll call your name and tell you and schedule you right there and then for the interview, so to speak. And then if you do well on that, they'll keep moving along. So anyways.
Was it a formalized oral panel?
It's interesting. It was different from anything that I've done before, because you went in, there was 2 deputies sitting in there, and basically asked you a couple of questions. I think they asked you if you had any felony arrest, have you used narcotics? I think there was just literally a handful of questions, and one that was kind of shocking, but it makes sense, is they asked, would you have any problem, using deadly force? I thought about it. I'm like, no, I guess I answered right. But, but yeah, so, I went through that, and then you get a background investigator, and, go through the whole medical and psych and, all that stuff. And 6 months later, I get the call saying, that I was set for an academy date. They gave me the academy date of December of 1991, and to show up, on this particular date. And you show up the first day, right? And it's all cool, right? You just kind of show up in business attire, and the academy tax staff's there, and they're actually kind of nice. They're kind of shaking your hand, and you're kind of, and they, you're sitting down, kind of like almost like college classroom type of experience, and no stress. They're telling you, well, this is what you're going to do for tomorrow. Show up here. You don't be late. Okay, makes sense. And little did you know, all hell was going to break loose when you showed up that next day, which was kind of interesting. And so, fortunate for me, that, like I said, this guy who had been dating my sister,
kind of give you the
hey, they're going to do this too. It's all a mind game, and they're going to be screaming and yelling in your face, and just kind of go along with it, and and they're just going to be screaming a lot, but that's pretty much it. And so okay, so.
I just think back when that first day, and a couple of people that made the mistake of showing up wearing maybe like a purple shirt or a very bright tie or something like that, and the tax staff being like, Are you going to the club after class today? As opposed to, looking professional, so to speak.
Yeah. So hold on one
Sure.
second. I got a text from work.
Don't worry about it.
We have about a 65 security staff. And what happens a lot is that area in LA, Carson and Wilmington, a really high density of transient population. And there's like almost like a transient community there that they kind of live at. And what ends up happening is because they know there's a lot of tools, a lot of equipment, copper, there at the refinery, they're constantly cutting into the fence line. And once they cut, they're looking for, anything of value and anything they can get. And so it's just this constant battle that we're on the lookout for them. And so, we have a ton of camera systems, we have mobile units driving around, and it's really all geared to keep a lot of that unfortunate transient out of there. At the end of the day, the big fear, obviously after 9/11, it kind of has continued is, weapons of mass destruction or using a refinery like that for, ultimately some type of a weapon, right?
Right.
Or taking, certain chemicals that we have on premise and using that as a weapon as well. So there's a lot of, federal, state, and local guidelines that we have to adhere to there at the refinery just to make sure, and that we're making sure that those chemicals and that plant remains safe, the refinery safe. And but a lot of, at the end of the day, I'm not really fearful that we're going to have a terrorist activity, although it's
you never know.
You never know. It's in the back of your mind, but it's these type of things that are common, is that people coming in and just crimes of opportunity.
Ultimately, what it means for you though is you're always working.
Yeah. It's like you're on the clock. Okay, what's today? Saturday, right? And I worked yesterday, and we had a couple of incidents that occurred, and then there's also the unfortunate things that happen is employees do get injured. Before I took the job there, I didn't realize there's a lot of dangerous gases that are emitting, and they try to avoid that at all costs. Trust me, they do. I've seen it. There's systems in place to, take that gas and try to refine that gas to make it safe before it's expelled, and a bunch of other things. But refinery of oil into gasoline and
has inherent risks.
Yeah, it's got some risk. It really does. And so, you just need to be careful. And so when you're in the plant, you have to wear called an H2S detector, and you basically pin it to your lapel or on your helmet, and that is testing the gases to make sure that there's nothing dangerous for you to breathe. So it's another interesting segment of my career that I'm kind of figuring out. Right. Hence, did I ever think I would get into that area? Not really, but okay, the security part of it, but I didn't think anything about the, benzene that's floating around in the air and sulfur and all this other stuff.
So going back to being in the academy, the one thing that I always remember being the junior class was, so you guys had finished the academy, the deputies had remained for the 2-week jail school.
Yeah, that we had to stay.
We still maintained, or we still all shared the same locker room. And I remember sitting in class one day, and one of the TAC staff comes in, and he's got 4 or 5 Berettas tucked in his waistband. Maybe not 4 or 5, but multiple of them. And they had done a locker inspection and found some of you guys who were in jail ops left your lockers open. And so he's pulling out Berettas, dumping magazines, and just laid into us about, safety and security. And I can vividly remember that day, because for the first instinct or when I first started doing it, you immediately look to your holster like, no, it's not mine.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah, right.
So that's one of the stories that I remember. So you did how many years law enforcement?
A total of 28.
Okay.
Yes, and it was kind of combination of different agencies. So I started out with LA Sheriff, right, and I worked there just about 3 years. The problem was back in that time period,
You weren't going to patrol for 12 years?
you weren't going to patrol for some time, and that just wasn't going to work for me. So I knew that for me, the patrol stations that I wanted to go to, those openings weren't going to probably be there for about 7 years from the point I started. And so I was looking at, like another 4 years, right? So I was like, yeah, that's not what I want to do. And then started looking into lateraling to different agencies. A few really stood out to me, in Orange County. And, so as I think I mentioned, in 95, I bought my first house in Mission Viejo. And so I was driving from Mission Viejo to Century. And I was working out of the new jail facility. So I started off at Wayside near Magic Mountain, lived out that way for a while, and then I put in for a transfer back down to LA, Men's Central Jail, worked Men's Central Jail, and then I was kind of realized, well, I think Century was the closest to Mission Viejo, and so I put in for a transfer to Century Regional Detention Facility. Got there before they actually even had any inmates. It was still brand spanking new jail. But at about maybe 6-7 months prior to that, I had put into lateral, and I was looking at Orange County agencies because I was living in Orange County. So I was looking at Huntington Beach, Santa Ana, and Anaheim. And when I went on a ride along in Anaheim, and man, I just had a blast. It was everything I thought it would be and more. And the guy that I was riding with, he was a lateral from LAPD, and so we hit it off. He was really nice guy, Amador Nunez, and just really hit it off. And he's like, yeah, you really want to come here, and I'm like, okay, yeah, sounds good. So went through the background process as a lateral, and remember getting a call, same thing, hey, City of Anaheim, give you a job offer for a police officer position. And I was like, yep, I'll take it. I'll be there in 2 weeks. So yeah, and so Anaheim was a really at that time it was 95. It was really busy, and in a lot of ways it still is. But super busy. I loved it. I was young. I was in my mid-20s. Just couldn't believe it. I was working graveyard shift, working with guys right around the same age as me. It was a really, really good group of individuals that were on my team,
right.
And a lot, became good friends with them as well. Really looked after each other, and so worked patrol. I went to community policing, and then I went to detectives. I worked a bunch of economic crimes, identity theft, and then I went over to burglary, and I worked all burgs. Residential auto and commercial burgs, and then interesting enough, during that kind of time period when I was in Anaheim, I got married, started having kids, and I wanted to promote, and I was a little fearful because I had a great schedule as a detective, right? So
it's hard to give up.
Yeah, hard to give up. 410. I had Fridays off, and a lot of opportunity to work overtime, right? A ton of overtime in Anaheim, working all the sporting events and concerts and things of that nature. So I was really enjoying that freedom. But if I were promoted, they were, going back as a patrol sergeant, probably looking at weekends, holidays, graveyard shift again. And my kids were little, so I was like, I'm not so sure about this. And my wife, and it still is a paralegal at Orange County DA. And then my sister, who's a deputy DA still at Orange County. And they both kind of said, you really should think about looking at Orange County DA as a DA investigator. I'm like, well, I really never thought about that. So, let me kind of check that out. So I applied, and then, kind of had that whole feeling like I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket, so to speak. And then I also applied to Riverside DA right around the same time, and tested right around the same time. Kind of finished up testing right around the same time, and I got a call from the assistant chief at Riverside DA, Clay Hodson, And he basically says, "Hey, we're done with everything. We want to offer you a position." So, all right, sounds good. I'll take it. And so I started at the DA's office as an investigator of February 2004. And so
basically, it was whoever was first asked to dance.
I was going to do it, right? Because I was like this. I had my mind already made up that after I looked into what a DA investigator did, and it fit what I was looking for, right? It was interesting when I was in patrol. My mother-in-law asked me one day. She goes, "Well, what is it you want to do? You don't want to be in patrol forever, do you?" And I'm like, "No, I'd like to become a detective." And that's all I wanted to do, was just become a detective. I would be really satisfied doing that, and I was. And so being a DA investigator, basically the same thing, right? You'd be a detective or an investigator as long as you want. And so I was like, that
works perfect.
Works perfect for me. I mean, I don't see anything better than this.
I would say most who go to the DA's office probably are looking for that same thing. I think that's probably largely what the draw is.
I think so. I mean, everyone that I've talked to, and I was at the DA's office slightly over 15 years, and everyone that I encountered during that time period all seemed to have the same, kind of game plan, so to speak, right? They all enjoyed being, detectives, right, from their respective agencies or investigators. They enjoyed that type of work. And then there was also kind of the quality of life, right? I enjoy having weekends and holidays off and not having, to work, shift work. And so there was, we all knew there was very, very limited shift work, if any at all, right? You're going to pretty much work, basically Monday through Friday. And occasionally you'd work maybe, a weekend. Really, really odd to work a holiday. So it just fit that lifestyle, and that quality of life that, you were kind of used to as a detective.
And I think you bring up a good point. You talk about family. Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, when you're that young single guy or newly married, work at patrol, it's no big deal.
Right.
All of a sudden, you've got a 5-year-old who's starting to play t-ball every Saturday, and you're stuck working patrol, or you just coming off graveyard and there's no way you can stay awake. All of a sudden now wait a minute, I've got the opportunity to have this kind of set schedule for, like you said, as long as you want.
Right.
And I can be there to be, because we've all worked with those guys who will tell you that they regret it today. Hey, I got that killer assignment working homicide, but I didn't see my kids grow up because I was constantly working.
Yeah. And I remember meeting guys like that at Anaheim, right? To your point. And I saw some of those guys. Some of those guys had great family lives, but some of them didn't, and that was really concerning to me. Right? They get divorced. Their kids were kind of bad. And out of control, and I didn't want that. And so I'm whether how you look at it. I've been very fortunate in the sense that I got 3 just great kids. I really do. I'm blessed. Where. And we were talking earlier, my 2 older ones, my daughter's a senior at University of Utah. She's got, she'll finish up on time. She's, 26 total units. So she's going to do 13, this coming up semester, and then 13, which is really manageable. So she'll be graduating right on time, which is perfect for me. And then my son, he's there, he'll be a sophomore, same thing. He got straight A's last year. I was, quite frankly, shocked, but okay, great, phenomenal. And then my youngest, he'll be a junior in high school over at Servite High School. And so, same thing. He's got all honors classes and advanced placement. Now, trust me, they didn't take after me. Those are wife, my wife. I always struggled in school, and I really, really did. I had some disabilities in terms of reading. I mean, really, really, really struggled in school. So, to me, I'm very proud of them. And, I've been married, it'll be 25 years, in January. So,
which is definitely a rarity.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there's not a whole lot of us, that, can claim that. It just, look, the job, obviously, it takes a toll, right? It really, really does. And it did for me as well, initially with when I was very first married. But, um, I knew that, Terry, which is my wife, was my girlfriend at the time when I was at Anaheim, as well as Sheriff Department. I knew she could deal with it, and the reason being is, and in I'd been at Anaheim for about 4 months, and I got into officer involved shooting, and I got struck, right. So I took 2 rounds, one of the pelvis and one of my leg, and end up almost dying, literally. The round that struck my pelvis entered, almost severed my colon. So it was pretty bad. And so I remember, waking up, out of surgery, and, obviously my mom and dad were there, but Terry was there too. And, she was, just super, super supportive the entire time. And even after that, my mom and dad were like, hey,
you really sure you want to do
yeah,
this?
exactly. That's exactly what their words were. Like, I remember at the dinner table, and Terry was there at my mom and dad's, and we're having this conversation, and it came up, and my mom and dad both, are you sure you really want to do this? And my mom's like, I don't want you to do this anymore. And I said, hey, look, this is something I want to do. And it's really unfortunate this happened, but I'm not going to let it stop me. And Terry was like, supportive. Like, yeah, okay.
But going back to how this job, and I would even say to a degree the military can impact a family, is that when we're young, it gives you so many opportunities. And if you go down that path of just kind of thinking about yourself, it's real easy to get wrapped up in those, 100-mile-an-hour units where you're never home, and you're chasing. I don't want to overuse the term chasing the bad guy, but what I mean is you're chasing that adrenaline. Yeah. I could see how, and we've all seen it, the guys who let that become their life as opposed to just a portion of their life. And unfortunately for both law enforcement and military, there is a little bit of, hey, you're either on this team 100%, you're all in, or you're not. Yeah. And if you back off just a little bit, and you're not that guy who, after this operation, you go out for beers, or if you're, hey, I'm not available this weekend, pretty soon you start getting left behind.
And there's a lot of truth to that. And I noticed that at Anaheim, right? So when I was at Anaheim, I saw a lot of that and was kind of victim to that. So when I first got there, just as you mentioned, man, that adrenaline rush was amazing. I couldn't believe, and I mean this very sincerely, couldn't believe that they were paying me to do this job. Because at some point I'm like, this is crazy that I'm paid to have this much fun, right? It should be against the law. Then, after everything like that, it becomes work, right? It's like, okay, I got to get up, I got to go to work. But for a good chunk of time, when I was working patrol as a young patrol officer, I couldn't believe it. I was having so much fun, and I didn't want to leave, right?
They conveniently leave out, hey, you're going to work all night, right, and then you're going to have to get up in 2 hours and go sit at court. Yeah. For 6.
Yeah, for 6.
They leave that little part out of the recruitment video.
Yeah, they don't show you that part, and then you're on, and then you show up for court and you sit there, and the DA says, I need you, and then, oh, they pled out. Yeah, thanks for showing up, and then you're like, really? Okay, so yeah, and then I saw the guys that were getting some of the most better choice spots, right? Because at a certain time when I was there, I was thinking, I'd like to get into gangs, right? Get on the gang team. And I saw the guys get on the gang team, a couple of my friends, but they were very committed and devoted to that team, and, they were there all day, all night, probably even, some of their own free time, I'd imagine. And then I remember, talking to a couple of the guys that were interested in getting in K-9, right? They were like, oh, you have to become an agitator first, right? Well, what I didn't know is, well, that's on your free time. The agitators are going on their free time. And I kind of struggled with that because on my free time, I wanted to, hang out with my girlfriend. Right. And, we wanted to go do this, we were going to do that. And working, weekends and holidays. So that meant a lot of time on the weekdays, right? Because she had a normal, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday job. And so, I was showing up, and wanting to hang out with her as soon as she got out of work, on a, let's say if I had a Monday or Tuesday off, like something like that. Right. And so, and then, if I was able to squeeze in a weekend, request a Saturday off or a Sunday, because we were going to go to somebody's wedding, that was just phenomenal because, I was like a normal person all over again. And so I started liking that feeling again, where having a normal schedule, but that wasn't conducive if you wanted to be part of the gang team, or if you want to be on the NARC team, or, if you want to be on the SWAT team or K9, because those guys were working all crazy hours.
But even also too, just the job itself, if you think back to it, if you're just working a normal patrol shift, the amount of impact that it has on your family, because, hey, so-and-so's having a barbecue this Saturday.
Right.
Sorry, honey, I got to work. I can't burn all my vacation time for all of our non-cop friends' activities.
Right.
And a lot of people who aren't in this line of work, and I would imagine it's the same way with the military,
right.
You don't have the greater majority of society operates on a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 with weekends and holidays off.
Right.
And when you're not part of it, it's quickly easy to not be included in it anymore. And pretty soon you find yourself just hanging out with other cops because they're the same ones that have the same schedule as you. So this job really does take a lot from your personal life. And so it falls back on us individually to really try to maintain that equilibrium.
Right. And so I was fortunate, excuse me, I was fortunate to have a pretty good FTO that one time told me make sure that you don't just have all cop friends, right? Because you can fall in that trap. And I didn't know at the time what he meant, because most of my friends were all cops at that point. And, I'm like, I remember him telling that, stuck in my head. I didn't know what he meant. So being very inquisitive, I stopped him one day and I said, hey, do you remember this conversation? He goes, yeah, I remember that. I go, can we talk about that? And he's like, yeah. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, look, it's easy for you to get wrapped up with work. You guys all have the same time off, right? We all, we all had, the same schedule, the same likes. We all kind of believed in the same morals and ethics, and we all kind of like doing the same thing, right? So he goes, it's easy to fall in that trap, right? Because birds of a feather flock together. Mm-hmm. He goes, the problem with that, you all start thinking the same, and you don't have any outlet, right? You start hating the same things and liking the same things and believing, whether or not it's right in the same things. You need to have a variety of friends. Mm-hmm. And he was absolutely right. And so I remember, kind of all of a sudden kind of moving away from some of the friends that I had at the department, not like just cutting them off, but, having other friends as well that weren't in law enforcement. So
your banking friends.
Yeah, right. So that and then all of a sudden, after a while, it kind of shed light onto what he was talking about. It did. I'm like, hey, I remember that we would go do that, and I don't think that was what I should have been doing, right? With that group of cops, right? Maybe that wasn't the right thing. Okay, so let me gravitate towards something else, and you get a little bit more clarity. And so I think that really helped in my overall career as well, where, I wasn't getting wrapped up into some of the stuff that was going on, at the time that was kind of popular, right? And it
was very easy to fall into that group mentality and find yourself in something that if you didn't step away, you potentially could ruin your career.
Yeah. And there was a handful of guys that ended up getting fired at Anaheim for, things that I thought at the time was okay and realized, it wasn't,
right.
So, kind of, fortunate, I didn't get caught up in that. And, so, for me, but yeah. I mean, and I think to this day, having a good balance of friends, family, it's healthy. It is.
One of the aspects that when I thought about creating this podcast that I really want to make sure I focus on and is going to be a reoccurring thing is that mental and emotional health of somebody who's in law enforcement or who's in the military. When you get to your transition point, you need to be the best person you can be. And that's somebody who is balanced, who didn't just put all their eggs in one basket of making being in the military or being a police officer their identity. And then when that's gone, there's nothing left.
Yeah. It's obviously easy to fall in that category as you're talking about. And you do need to have other outlets, other ideas to prepare you for life outside of work, right? Okay, so a couple of things that I realized, and once again, I had some really good mentors growing up, in the police department, in law enforcement in general, right? That talked about some of those kind of things and some of those pitfalls. And I remember being in Anaheim, and they were saying, oh, this one detective is going to retire, and they're going to go to his retirement party. And I was talking to a couple other guys about retirement, like, what's retirement? Because at that time, I was, just kind of coming towards I don't know, I was probably late 20s, early 30s. And, what's retirement?
Seems so far away.
It seemed really far. And they're like, oh yeah, there's this thing called 3% at 50. And I'm like, 50? Oh my God, you're old, right? And so, yeah, so once you hit 50 years old, you could retire. But it seemed like a thing really out in the far future. So I went to this guy's retirement party, and everybody was talking about what a wonderful soul he was, which he really was. He was a great cop, but you also noticed too that probably a few weeks after he retired, everybody forgot about him, right? Just like they filled his spot in detectives, and kind of forgot about the guy. And I'm sure he had guys from work that called him every now and then, but even to my to my point, when I retired, a few of the guys called me every now and then, and it's really kind of tailored really super down, right? I hardly hear anything from them. So you still need to have connections and outlets and friends, and it would be a really, I guess, disappointing and kind of lonely existence if that happened and all my friends were just from, Riverside DA's office, and well, okay, what happened to all these so-called friends? I'm not hearing from them anymore. But unfortunately, that's not my case. I have a lot of, other activities and things that I'm involved in. And so also there's that whole thing of identity, right? And that's one thing that one of the guys told me about is like, because there's 3% at 50, but then there was this one cop, he was like 54 years old and he's still working. What's going on with that guy? And he's like, well, he could have retired a few years ago, but he's kind of worried, like, what's he going to do? What does he have going on? And
the only thing that identified him was being a cop.
And I remember having a conversation with somebody and saying, no, he's probably scared that once he leaves the police department, who is he? And it was really super true. And I remember when I was about ready to retire, kind of having some of those thoughts, right? Fortunately, I also realized, hey, I'm still pretty darn young. 50 really isn't that old. And
once you get there, it's like, wait a minute,
I'm not that old. And I wanted to continue to work. And so, for me, I transitioned, pretty easily, boom, I found another job. As soon as I found that job, I said, hey, I'm retiring, I'm done. And so it worked out really, really well. But yeah, there is that whole thing is like, and I kind of find that even now, right? So, working in the private sector, you're not really a cop. You're
You're a used to be.
You used to be, but you're not. And in some ways, you kind of almost want to act like one, but there's some liability to that. So you got to be careful to all, and keep that in perspective. And so, yeah, you really have to know when to let it go, and it was a part of your history, right? And it part of what makes you up and, your character and who you are, but it's not everything, right? It's just
it shouldn't be everything.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. You can't deny it, but it should just be a segment of who you are, not entirely who you are.
So talking about that transition out, when would you say you started planning for your next career?
Almost 2 years is when I started planning, believe it or not. And I knew that transition was going to take a while because I was going to be selective, right? Kind of what I wanted to do, right? I just don't want to jump into one thing and, be really unhappy like the bank thing, right? Mm-hmm. And talking to some other people who had transitioned out, they all kind of said the same thing to me. Hey, it's not going to happen overnight, and so, you can be more selective if you take your time and you have a plan. And that's what they all say, have a plan, right? What is exactly what kind of job that you're looking for? And, what is it that you want to do? And what is it that you're going to be happy with? And my wife would say, make sure you, try to find your dream job, because here's your chance, right? You have all this experience, you have all this knowledge, and, why don't you try to make it, work for you? And she was right, so I'm okay. So so I started planning, started interviewing, started looking out at different things. And, I found some very unique things that I've had the opportunity to talk to other people about, like, don't do what I did, or don't do this, or don't sell yourself short, So I think so I retired out as an assistant chief. There were certain jobs in the private sector that it looked attractive to me, and a lot of it was as an investigator, right? An investigator, for an insurance company or whatever, private industry. And so I started applying those, and then what I was realizing during the interview process is they were looking at me kind of funny, and like I'm not getting this, I'm not quite getting what's going on, and so. I at one point I realized, I'm not going to get this position. I already can tell from the way the interview is going. So I'm done. And, so I'm just going to be asked, hey, I kind of got the feeling that maybe I'm not really a good fit for, this position. And would you mind helping me out here? Can you tell me why? And so the other person sitting across the table there said, yeah, you left as an assistant chief. Why would you want to step down at this position? You're overqualified. And kind of got the feeling like, you're just looking for a retirement job. And I wasn't. I mean, yeah, I was retired, but I wasn't looking just to, kick my, feet up.
They're going by their experience of people coming in the door.
Right. And so
we're just looking to basically keep a seat warm.
Exactly. And, and then they're like, we're looking for, for work dogs, and, you're not really, don't strike us as that. So I was like, wow, okay. That's eye opening. So what do I do? And so I had it, I changed the, and instead of getting on Glassdoor and typing in, investigator, I started typing in supervisor or manager or director of what I was interested in, right? Director of security, manager of security, supervisor of security. So I also went that route, and then, director of investigations, and all of a sudden, a bunch of other spots opened up, and I'm like,
but
hey,
that you hadn't been considering before.
No, I hadn't, because I just wanted, something, take the easy road, so to speak. Yeah, I'm qualified. Why wouldn't you want me? I got a ton of investigative experience. I've been an investigator, since 2000, if not earlier. Yeah, actually earlier. And I got at least 20 plus years of investigative experience. So what's the problem?
This should be a no-brainer.
Yeah. And so I did that. And all of a sudden, start getting, calls and emails like, hey, you fit this position, would you be interested in interviewing? And so a lot more opened up, so what I tell people is, hey, don't sell yourself short, seriously, if you were a supervisor, or even if you weren't, kind of have that reach out there, right?
Look higher than lower.
Yeah, exactly. And so jump in and just go for it. What's the worst they're going to tell you? No?
Because you bring up a good point. We bring 25 to 30 years, even 10 years of law enforcement experience to the table to a group of people who don't have any law enforcement experience.
None.
So you don't have to have been a high-ranking officer to bring a lot of experience to the table.
Yeah. So here's what I found remind me to touch on a thing about our experience. Our experience being, whether it was, working in patrol, working in investigation, and then, in supervision and management, because there's something unique that I found in all that a lot of other law enforcement professions don't have. And I'm not going to knock the feds, but they don't have something unique that we have. Okay. You want me to jump on that, or?
Sure.
Okay. So here's what I found. So I took this position. Initially, I didn't take the position with Marathon Petroleum. I initially retired. I was offered a position with San Bernardino County, supervising their conservatorship investigators. Right. Okay. So, and there was about 12 of them, and that's where initially.
And just so you know, if you don't want to mention companies, it's purely up to you.
Okay. So you can bleep that out later, whatever you want to do. So I started out with them, and it wasn't quite the fit that I was thinking of, because the individual that was supervising me, who had no investigative experience,
was trying to tell you how to lead an investigation.
How to lead an investigation. And I went in and met with a couple of judges, and we started talking about, so, at the DA's office where we come from, we're very proactive. Probably one of the more proactive DAs in if not California, the entire United States, right? So very, very, very proactive. And, we did a lot of stuff in elder abuse, very, very active in elder abuse. We had a whole entire team, put together to help in that area. And we worked with a bunch of other agencies, right? In conjunction. So it was really a teamwork, right? So I was taking that model, because in these conservatorships and things of that nature, you have elder abuse, and there's a segment of that, and that you work. So I met with some of the judges, and I said, hey, when I was at the DA's office, we put together this team, and they're like, a team of elder abuse. And let me explain what we did. And my supervisor, she was sitting in there, and she's like, as we walked out, she's like, I don't think we're going to do that. I'm like, why not? This would just be phenomenal. I mean, we're not doing it right now. The judges love the idea. It's a force multiplier, because we can bring in all these other different agencies that handle elder abuse, and they have their expertise in that area. And once again, we put this team together, and we can just do some phenomenal things. And I kind of got the feeling that there was a little intimidation, on her end. And as we kind of progressed, other things were happening. One of the things that I would do as a supervisor, manager, and assistant chief, I would always meet with my team, right? Whether it was individually as a group. Usually, the very first time around was individually, and explain expectations, and what I expected of them, and what they can expect from me, and begin this open dialogue. And so that's what I was scheduling interviews with these investigators, at the Superior Court. And she was like, well, why are you doing that? And it was just becoming evident that this was not going to. So
one of the hardest things I think for people to learn about leadership is deferring to knowledge to somebody who's less senior to you.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to be a matter of time on, but it could be, they may be subordinate to you, but they may have more specific individual knowledge in a given area. Embrace that.
Right.
Don't feel threatened by it.
Yeah, well, she was threatened by it. So, and I'm like, this is not going to work for me. And so I went to work with a fintech company that I was going going to oversee security operations for their LA office, Boulder, Colorado, and Santa Barbara. And so, and then they had a contract security staff that I would oversee. So to me, that seemed a little bit. It seemed a little bit better fit, right? And so I started, worked there for about a year, worked out really, really well, gained a tremendous amount of knowledge, working with, your access control, Linnell, CCTV, Genetec systems, path of travel, a whole slew of things in the area of security, physical security that, was really, beneficial, and had an opportunity to also work on their global investigations team that was for employee misconduct. So I also did that as well. So huge amount of experience. And then a position came up at the refinery, and that one just looked super challenging, really attractive. And so went in, I sat down, and went through the interview process. And that was to oversee, security operations at the refinery there, and great fit, fast pace, lots and lots of activity, and the individual that I was going to, take over the position, we're going to stay on for about a month to help me transition, right? So it's great in theory, like, hey, this guy's going to help me out, kind of show me the ropes, so to speak, but also remember, there's also a problem with two chefs in the kitchen, right? Mm-hmm. It can get a little kind of chaotic. So, on its face value, it seemed like a great idea. This guy was a Fed. He had retired from a Fed agency, and came on and was doing this position, overseeing security operations there at the refinery. Well, what I found out pretty quickly was the way the security was set up at the refinery was a lot of ways like patrol, right? So they have mobile units, they have some fixed units. They dressed, almost like a police officer. They wore BDUs, Sam Brown. They had no firearm. They had handcuffs, pepper spray, and baton. And so, they really resembled a lot like traditional police officer. And kind of function in that same way. They had, supervisors, assistant supervisors. And what I found out pretty quickly is, if you didn't come from a patrol background and didn't really understand how patrol function works, there might be a little problem. And so the guy from the Fed, well, he worked a lot of investigations, a lot of terrorist, investigations, but didn't have a patrol background. They don't do that kind of thing typically, right? And so I found some of the stuff that he was doing in that kind of element was not the way you should be doing it. Right. And so there is and still is. I'm working on a lot to be improved upon, because what I found out was, he it's kind of like an absentee supervisor, so to speak. He kind of put on everybody else, and one of the things he told me, he goes, hey, this job's pretty good. Things kind of just run itself, so you don't have a whole lot to worry about. And when when you get in there and you look, I'm like, no, there's a lot to worry about. There's a really disconnect between that position that now I'm in and then everybody else. And so one of the first things I did once he left was I set up a time to meet with each supervisor and actually ride with them on each shift. So, I did day shift, and there's two sides to the refinery. So, I did the one side day shift, and the other side day shift, swing shift, and, the other side, and graveyards, and, asked people, point blank questions like, hey, tell me, like, what is it you really like working here? Oh, like, well, tell me about some of the things that you dislike. Like, oh, well, and as you start to, meet people and talk to them, and they become a little bit more comfortable with you, they start talking about it. And then, I would say, well, what are some of the things that we could do to make the job, you know, a little bit more enjoyable? You tell me. And so you began this dialogue, and what I found out, was a lot of things that I wasn't being told, at my level. I would meet with supervision. There was no talk of this, right?
Right.
There was no talk about, the really the lack of morale, or the lack of proper training, or the inability, for these people to really have some time to themselves, because, staffing levels are so low. So having that ability to sit in and talk with these people for, 3-4 hours per shift was insightful to me.
Well, the other thing too is when you engage them, you get that sense of buy-in from them, because they actually feel like they're being part of the solution,
right?
As opposed to just being told, nope, it's just going to be this way.
Yeah, and I think we came from same the last agency, the DA's office. One of the things that we were really big in on, right, is ownership, right? We talked about ownership a lot there, and we read a lot of management books and leadership books and supervision. About ownership and buy-in, and how do you achieve some of that, and so I took a lot of that and applied it to where I'm at now, and one of the things that I asked to some of the fixed points, right? So these guard checks, right? Go in there and I said, hey, tell me how everything's working out for you, and what is it that I could improve on? And two things, the chairs suck in here. Okay, not a problem. And in the evening, when I look out this glass right here, at whether it's pedestrian traffic or vehicles coming in, to the facility, there's a lot of glare. And is there something we can do about that? And I was like, absolutely. So within a very, very, very short time period, we got new chairs put in there, and we went out and got new lamps, so that we can change the lighting, so it's not creating all this glare. And so those are things that, I wanted to get, done to show we do care. I do care. And I want to make this place, a much more enjoyable experience for you. Now, work's work. I get it, but that's not to say that, it can't be, an enjoyable when you're there, as opposed to like, I don't want to come to work because this place is horrible. I'm trying to, improve on that. And so other areas that, I immediately identified was, okay, so morale, right? There's no real like cure-all for morale. We hear it all the time, right? Oh, morale, how do you improve on it? If I knew it, I would write a book and I'd be a bazillionaire, right?
Yes.
It doesn't exist, because it's unique to the situation. It's unique to the individual. Everyone gets a little bit inspired over something differently, right? But you got to start somewhere, right?
But even something like you said, simply just getting them a more comfortable chair to sit in, when you boil it down to their world, that was enormous. From the company's perspective, we bought a chair, or we bought 10 chairs.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the ability to bring yourself down to that level,
right,
and hey, that's the chair you got, just use it, that's not going to work, and that's not going to improve morale.
No, it's not. And so one of the things that I think we all like is we like recognition, right? And recognition in a lot of ways isn't very expensive for at my level. Like, I don't have to give you a raise. Everyone wants more money, but after a while, we all know. Yeah, you kind of forget about it, right? You get it, you make it, you're happy for 6 months, and well, I need another raise because I bought a car. So, but I needed something more long term, something more meaningful. So how do I achieve that? So I started thinking about it, and I'm like, there's no formal recognition program that they have right now. Okay, so they do a lot of wonderful things. Like, for example, had a vehicle. We're accepting a delivery at the refinery. A vehicle shows up. The post guard at that guard shack makes contact with the driver, and the driver has a strong odor of alcoholic beverage coming from their person. Well, they stopped them. They said, "Hey, can't let you in. In this condition." They get a hold of that individual. Got a hold of their supervisor. Their supervisors rolled out, said, "Yeah, we can't let you in." They get a hold of the driver's supervisor. So. At the end of the day, potentially they kind of help prevent a serious problem. Because what if that driver, crashed into one of the fuel tanks and the whole damn thing blew up, right? So that's a big problem. So,
but it's not an unrealistic potential.
No, not at all.
And so acknowledging the fact that, hey, you just didn't stop a guy who had alcohol in his breath.
Mm-hmm.
You potentially prevented a major catastrophe.
Right. And so we needed a way to recognize that. And I needed a way to say, I see what's going on, in a public way. Right. So what we did was, we came up with a challenge coin, right? And so, one side is, the logo of the company, and then the other, talks about security. And so we came up with it. We had my boss signed off on it. And so we ordered, about 300 challenge coins. And so I put out, and I got with the security coordinator, he and I, and we discussed, got to come up with a recognition plan. And so we talked about it in collaboration, basically said, every supervisor will nominate one individual per shift for, doing something above and beyond. And we had a very short list, right? Of I didn't want to get too detailed because it's a work in progress. Preventing a catastrophic, incident at work. One category is going above and beyond, expectations. So we had like 3 or 4 categories that were, in my opinion, I think were general enough. And so basically we said, okay, we'll institute this recognition program where we require every supervisor to do that. Now, the reason why I say require every supervisor to do that, because if I say, hey, just nominate somebody, well, you know what's going to happen? Nobody's going to do it. Right. So, and like I told, my leadership team is basically, hey, this is how we're going to do this, and we'll tweak it out as we go. But if I don't say they have to do it, then nobody's going to do it. So instituted the recognition program, and the guards are hearing about it. They like the idea. So I'm already seeing, a sense of like, hey, this new guy really does care about us. And so I had an incident yesterday where one of the supervisors, guards calls me and says, hey, the sheriff department's coming out. We had an incident. The person that we detained, and ultimately the sheriff department wrote a citation for trespassing, that person's claiming some misconduct against the deputy. And so we have an IA, investigator coming out, and they were a little concerned about it. I said, stand by, you jump in my car, I'll come out to where you're at, and I'll meet with you, and we'll talk about this. And so went over, I said, hey, don't worry about it. What time are they, as the investigator from the sheriff department come, they're supposed to be here within about 15 minutes. I said, okay, this is probably what's going to happen. They're going to ask you these questions, things that you and I've done, right? In terms of IAs.
But they've never gone through something like that.
Never gone through that. So it's scary,
mm-hmm.
right? And so you got to put them at ease and tell them, this is the process. This is what they're looking for. This is how most likely this is going to go. And they're okay. And then I said, and I'll ask if I can sit in here with you while the process is going on. I said, great. Boom. Sheriff department rolls up. I went out, met the investigator, handed him my card. I said, this is what I do here. This is who I am. I said, asking, hey, I just want to confirm, is this part of the criminal investigation that you're following up on, in reference to the trespassing, or is this something different in reference to an internal affairs investigation? And they said, oh, well, it's a preliminary IA because of the complaint made by this individual. I said, okay, not a problem. I said, would you have any problem with me sitting in on the interview? Oh, nope, no problem at all. So this goes a long ways, because now the former, individual that was in charge of security, he never did any of this stuff.
Right.
And now you're doing all these things and showing I care. I care about making the improvements here. I care about your well-being. And so I'm already seeing the benefits of, that type of leadership. And so, one of the things that we had talked about at the DA's office is, leadership and specifically, a servant leader. Right. And I do ultimately believe in that and buy into it. But it's one thing saying it,
It's another thing doing it.
Right. And so that's where the real hard work is like, you can talk about it and you can, say, this is who I am and this is what I want to do. The really, really difficult part about that is actually instituting it and doing it on a daily basis, because the first time you don't do it, you just lost all your credibility.
Right.
So it's one of those type of things that where you have to be really mindful of doing that. Right. And so, the more opportunity, I'm not a big reader, but I think the more opportunity you have to read books in reference to leadership and specifically being a servant leader, has helped me, to maintain that, that idea of what's this all about? What do I really need to do to make this work? One, for myself and then, obviously two, for those individuals that I'm working for, right? Because that's how I feel about it. So, it's something that I have to go back every now and then, and kind of do that self-evaluation. And I'm recently doing that right now because of this, new position that I took on. It's a large security staff. I oversee, multiple, responsibilities. And so I just very recently, within the last week, kind of, went back, got a new book on leadership, and and really kind of said, okay, it's time to fine tune and readjust where I'm at. And one of the things, as I'm reading this book, it basically said is, you need to learn how to lead yourself, right? And so.
And that process is never ending.
Yeah.
It's always something that you're constantly, if you're doing it correctly, you're constantly evaluating yourself and how well you're doing.
Yeah. So it's not really an exact science. It's more of an art.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like any art, you're constantly improving upon it and changing it and tweaking it. And so, so I find a lot of pleasure as well as a lot of challenge, in that area. And so I've come to realize I actually kind of, it's enjoyable. It's an enjoyable experience watching, this kind of take hold and changing the culture of where I'm at, from where I got, all these people are walking on eggshells because, the guy before me, my predecessor, was just a tyrant and, really was like a big brother. I mean, he had cameras set up, in the guard shack so he can watch them. Like, it was horrible. And so one of the things I told him, like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just not going to do it. Now, doesn't mean that, if there's an issue, we'll go back and view video. Absolutely. I'm not going to be, not going to say I'm not going to do that.
Right.
But for me to sit for 8 hours and just watch it, not happen.
So somebody today who hasn't planned for their retirement.
Yeah.
Circumstances, whatever. Because the one thing with this podcast that I've realized is a lot of us don't make it to retirement.
Yeah.
You might have that plan.
Sure.
But things get in the way. So from your experience, if law enforcement career ends tomorrow, but you don't have a plan, what would be some of the first steps you would recommend doing moving into that private sector aspect?
So one of the things that I would say is, if you're interested in that private sector, right? Look at the job description, right? So you find something that you're interested in, right? Like, whatever it may be, an investigative position or, head of security for, XYZ company, right? Look at what they're really talking about, because there's some really key aspects in there that they're looking for. Some are really geared towards, they really want a hands-on individual, security. One kind of wants a combo. They want you to be, a security supervisor, but they also want you to do some type of, investigations, right? Whether, for misconduct or the employees, but start looking at those things. The majority of, individuals in our particular situation, we have that experience and it's invaluable, right? So start tailoring your your background for that specific site, but you have to tailor the verbiage. So I'm going to give you an example. Because you're probably thinking, okay, well, give me an example. Mm-hmm. So at the DA's office, we're unique in the sense that we have a district attorney who's an elected official, and a lot of times that individual requires some type of protection, right? So that we go out, and we take the dignitary protection course, right? Whether it's 8 hours, 24 hours, it doesn't matter, right? But we get a post certification in that area, right? Dignitary protection, right? Well, many private companies want protection for their execs, right? But you have to tailor it. It's not dignitary protection, it's executive protection, right? And so you need to look at that. You have to tailor, because they don't understand our world, right? They just don't. They don't understand our world. They don't understand our humor. They don't get it. And so you have to be specific as to what they're looking for. So because they got the person that is looking, initially screening your application is a civilian HR person, probably out of college, only a few years, right? Because that's kind of like the first part of what they're doing in HR. They haven't got into the other parts of HR. Right. They're doing the initial screening of applications. So if you come out with something like dignitary protection, they may not know exactly what that is, because all they know is they have executives that work there and they need some executive protection work. That's a requirement for this particular. But if you put executive protection, it's the same thing as dignitary protection, right? It's just verbiage, right? So you really have to kind of look at that. Also, things that we handle multiple shootings. We handle homicide situations. So what is that? It's a critical incident, right? That in your application, extensive experience, in critical incident management, right? You have to management, right? Right. So there's these areas that you have to go back and look and say, okay, how do I change that verbiage? I'm not telling you to lie, because we're not doing that. What we're talking about is changing the verbiage to fit that situation. We handle many times budgetary items. Don't forget to mention that. That's really critical in the private industry, that you are able to, itemize and, understand budget and line item things. Don't take for granted the training and the experience that we've had, and utilize that. So those are things that I would recommend, that if you want that transition, to do that. Now, here's also a thing that I just realized, because it happened to me last week, is, and I'm not a big fan of social media. I don't like people knowing my business. And so, but LinkedIn, okay, it is an amazing tool, and I did not utilize it as much as I should have, to what I'm seeing that you can. It's a powerful tool. Right. You're applying for a position for XYZ company. You can go in there and look if anybody, and most people have, they'll put, so let's say the position that you're applying for is, you're looking at the director of supervision or director of security at XYZ company, right? You go in, you type in XYZ company, and you type in, director of security. Well, they're going to show you most likely the guy whose that job is in there. Reach out to him, call him. I've had people call me for positions that I held at other places that I worked, saying, "Hey, I know that you just left this place 6 months ago. They opened it up. Can I have some questions? Can you?" And that's amazing, because I was there. I worked that spot. I got hired for that position. I know a lot of intimate details about what was going on there. Allow them to pick your brain, and be upfront. Hey, look, here's what here's really what the spot's all about, right? I know it says this, but you're going to be doing a lot of this, and this. And
here's the between the lines information.
Exactly. And so great tool to utilize. And like I said, just, within the last 2-3 weeks, I had 3 people that reached out to me because they're applying for a position that I had left, a while ago. And, they're asking, well, can you, tell me about what you did there? Can you tell me what to expect in the next interview? Phenomenal. And so I think use that to your advantage as well. Don't be shy. You know, that's one thing about, police work, right? We're not really that shy, right? Because you got to go ask, some, witness or victim, hey, what happened? And so use that to your skills, use that to your advantage, drawing that information out.
An example I've heard recently, and I thought it was really good, when you talk about putting your experience correctly, not lying,
no,
but putting it in the right language.
Right.
It's the same thing as if you're saying, if I need to explain this item to you, and I'm used to explaining it in English, but now I got to translate it to German.
Yeah.
Take it out of the police lingo and put it into their lingo.
Exactly.
It's the same experience. You just have to put it in the words that make them understand.
Right. And that's what you want to do, especially when you're applying for a position, because each time and every time that I applied, it seems to be the same scenario, right? They screen it. You get an initial call from the HR person, right? And the HR person will say something to this effect: "Hey, we went over through your application, and it looks like you're, potentially you can be a really good fit. The hiring manager had some additional questions, so I want to, ask those, on his behalf. Or before I send this off to the hiring manager, we just want to make sure that you actually meet the criteria, something along those lines. So you have to make that, whether it's your resume or that application they're saying, very attractive to that hiring manager, or to the HR individual initially. Many, many times by the time you get to the hiring manager, they're like you and I, right? Hey, yeah, I came from, this police department, or I was a Fed here, I did that. So now you're speaking the same language. But for that initial, no. Yeah, they're looking at multiple stuff. They're just not looking at you for, director of security. They're looking at for some accountant, and they're looking at for somebody to handle the reception desk. And so there's all these multiple. So they have some key words that they're looking for, that, in those areas, right? So for, law enforcement, we want to make sure that we're so used to using our law enforcement, language and acronyms and things of that nature. Try to step away from that, get and apply it to that private sector, right? You want to use those key elements, strong sense of, of teamwork and collaboration, things that reflect who you are, but they translate a little bit differently into the private segment of things.
And just to kind of wrap this up, what would you say, or what hurdles or hindrances have you found coming from the law enforcement side, going into the private sector side, that you make sure to avoid?
Well, I think one of there's two things. So one, you got to avoid, well, we used to do this like that at the DA's office or at Anaheim, right? So you got to avoid that, right? Because you're not there. It's not a law enforcement environment. These people, for the most part, these are private, security guards that don't have a post background, right? They don't have an intermediate, advanced supervision, management, post certificates. They don't have specific training that we would require, and have a post certificate go along with it, right? They're going to a basic, security school, and may have, for the most part, a guard card, right? But really, really basic. I asked on that kind of thing I was talking about when I was doing those rounds with everybody. I asked everyone, hey, if we had a suspicious vehicle in our parking lot, show me what you would do. And every single one of them did it differently, right? If we had a trespasser and you were going to detain him, show me how you put cuffs on him. And every single one of them did it differently.
So no continuity of training.
No, there was nothing uniform whatsoever. So that's another thing that I want to make sure that we change there as well. But for example, okay, you came from a police department before you get to the DA's office. I came from a police department before we get to the DA's office. If we got teamed up and we went to go, arrest somebody, I'm pretty confident we would probably do it like we did.
We're going to be at least in the same zip code.
Right. You're going to be, if I was a primary, you're going to be my cover, and I know kind of what to expect, right? If we were going to make a vehicle stop, I'm pretty confident to say that we would probably, do it very similar to each other, right? So, but that's because we had, the training, we did it numerous times, and we're very comfortable, in that environment. Very different. So that's one thing you have to know is it's not going to be at that level. So bring it down a little bit, and if you want to get it to that level, it's really going to be on you to get them to that particular level. But it's typically not going to be at that level, and you shouldn't expect it.
But at the same token, leave where you were.
Yep.
Where you were.
Exactly.
You're operating in a new environment. It's also as important for you, I would imagine, to adapt to that new environment as opposed to constantly pointing out, well, that's not how I used to do it.
Right. And I think, and they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear, well, when I was a cop, or they don't want to hear that. Well, when I was the commander, we used to do it this way. They don't want to hear that. And so, but you can bring things up to speed and with training, make that happen in a lot of different ways. But you have to realize you're not coming from that particular environment, right? So that, I think that's really something to think about, leave that at the door.
Good.
And yeah, I think you'll I'm not saying to lower your expectations or anything like that, but you have to, just like anything else, get in there, observe, right? Use the old your community policing skills and kind of just, observe, like, okay, let me see what's going on here. Let me ask a few questions, but don't be judgmental. Okay, I get it, and just kind of take that look, but be willing to get your hands dirty, as well. And wherever you are, whether it's, whether you transition from, from your agency and become an investigator, of an SIU at an insurance company, same thing, man. Kind of observe what they're doing and don't say, hey, well, I was an investigator and this is how we would do it, because that may rub some people wrong. Go in there, observe, learn their way. And then you'll be amazed, because you'll start, just because who you are and the experience you have, you'll start doing things, hey, because you have a lot of skill, right? And a lot of experience. You had a lot of post training. And you start doing how you do it just because, and that actually, believe it or not, they're watching you just as much as you're watching them. And a lot of times they'll say, oh, hey, that's kind of cool how you did that. Can you, and then be that mentor, be that coach, and help. When I was at my last assignment, our employer, and I got to do global investigations for them, right? And so we were doing it was employee misconduct, and I was asked, hey, can you sit in on a couple of interviews, and I'm like, yeah, what do you want me to do? Just take notes. Okay, I'll just take notes, not a problem, right? I didn't go, let me show you this done, right? So I go, okay, yeah, sure. So I'm sitting there taking notes, and then as the interview's going on, I was writing things. Well, he probably should have said this, probably said, but not saying anything, just taking the notes, of that meeting, and then the person who was the primary on that asked me, hey, Tim, you got anything else to add? Oh yeah, hey, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask this, and so I asked these particular questions that I would have had asked, had I, was running the show, and boom, hitting, okay, and then at the end of it, right, said, hey, great, thanks, and then I get a ping from the the other investigator, hey, you got a second to talk? Yeah, sure, no problem, you want to brief about this? Hey, that was great, that you asked. I would have never thought that, and so, and then I got a reputation of like, hey, do you mind, helping other people out on these investigations? It seems like you got a lot of experience on it, and you're like, yeah, no problem, I'm willing to do that, and so it's really your actions, right? Instead of being, the know-it-all, saying, well, this is how we should do it. Doesn't come off. But if you have that humble attitude, like, hey, I'm there to help you, and if they say, and you can be constructive, about how to handle something, and you just be constructive about it,
Bring your experience to the table, not your ego to the table.
Exactly, and that has gone for me a really long ways. I've and trust me, there was a lot of bumps along that way, because it took me a little while to figure out, because I wanted to bring my ego, because I was that a personality type thing, is I wanted to show everyone all my knowledge and experience. And then you realize I'm rubbing people the wrong way. Right. And so, kick that down. And I'm like, I'm not going to do that.
Thank you for taking your time to listen to the podcast. I truly hope you enjoyed it. Not only is the podcast available on audio platforms, but you can also watch it on YouTube at the Transition Drill Podcast channel. The best way you can help the show is by getting the word out. Please subscribe for future episodes. If you think somebody else might enjoy it, I would appreciate it if you would share it with them. Also, if you have the time, please go to Apple Podcast and leave me a rating. I welcome your feedback, both positive and negative. You can also go to the website, transitiondrillpodcast.com, and through the contact tab, send a message directly to my email with any comments or suggestions. Thank you again, and I hope you tune in for the next one.